Well, Formula One said goodbye to Imola on a positive note, delivering us a decent race as the sport makes the short trip across the continent for this weekend's Monaco Grand Prix. It was a shock win on debut for Red Bull Racing's Max Verstappen, as he took the lead from Oscar Piastri at the first corner and then actually dominated the race, which we will come to shortly, ahead of the McLarens of Lando Norris and, of course, Piastri. So joining us to make sense of all that and look ahead to Monaco this weekend is Jake Boxall-Legge joining me in the office. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Yeah, it was a good race, which I watched on a train back from visiting a friend in Plymouth. So I saw it sort of on a very small screen.
I mean, so you had almost as far to travel as the teams then.
Exactly, yeah. But, I have a feeling the person sat next to me on the train was trying to watch in on my phone as well, which I felt was not on.
Well, no, but we should encourage that. More
maybe.
Fans, the merrier. No, we should say, yes, I work for Autosport, and you should also buy the magazine website. Anyway, we'll get on to that. But also joining us remotely this time is Ronald Vording. Ronald, how are you doing?
Yeah, all good. About to catch a flight to Monaco, or to Nice basically, for the Monaco Grand Prix. So massively looking forward to that one, especially going trackside, which is always one of the highlights of the year. And yeah, I agree with JBL. Imola was a surprisingly good one, I would say, also in terms of overtaking. So yeah, lots to talk about, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get straight into that. And Jake, I'm going to ask you the obvious, I think it's the obvious question really, is it looked, we talked beforehand that we expected McLaren to have the fastest car, and Piastri did take pole, but once Verstappen had done his amazing move around the outside, he actually looked in control of the race. So can we put this down to the upgrade packages, or do we think that was just a sort of a bit of a one-off because of Imola? Why do you think Red Bull had that level of performance?
I think it's twofold. And what we know is that Red Bull has struggled with keeping tyres in the temperature range throughout the race. It's getting the temperature in and it's keeping the temperature in, but not too much temperature. So it's a very kind of nuanced thing. It's something you really have to work on. And one of the things that Red Bull did bring to Imola was a change to its rear wheel hub. So it had a few area changes around there just to kind of boost the rear end downforce. We knew that they'd had a new floor in Miami, side pods to match that in Imola as well. But there's also been a few changes to the actual ducting around the wheel hub as well, and that's something that McLaren is super advanced on. It's really done a good job this season with developing airflow within the wheels that keeps temperature sort of relatively well managed. And so I think Red Bull made a step towards that this weekend. It also improved rear end downforce as well, so the sliding was reduced, so you're not basically overexposing, oversaturating the tyres in corners and therefore not having an excess of temperature. But this is sort of like a step beyond that. It's got the rear end downforce, but now it's also got the management. So I think that's something that's given Verstappen just a much better chance to use that in a race. He led in Miami for a little bit, but there was that very sort of inevitable moment where the McLarens were just going to catch and pass him. There wasn't any of that in Imola. He had the genuine race pace advantage over the McLarens. So I think it's a little bit of Verstappen having the tools to be able to do what he's good at, and secondly, Red Bull vastly improving its car. So I think they've done a really strong job at Imola.
Well, Ronald, moving on from that, I mean, can we say, even if we argue that Red Bull has made a step, for me, the difference there was Verstappen's racecraft, first corner. Piastri was not bold enough, really, and Verstappen was absolutely maximum attack, presumably because he knew he needed clean air. So I think we're probably at the point, aren't we, that his racecraft made the difference at Imola.
Yeah, I think so. And I have to say also the words that Oscar spoke after the race turned out to be spot on, because he got a question, with the knowledge you have now, in hindsight, what would you have done differently? And he said, I would have braked 10 meters later. and then the next day... Would. Yeah, but then the next day I had to look at the data, and the difference was exactly those 10 meters, because Max kept his right foot down 10 meters longer. In fact, the move already started before that, because his car positioning was excellent, I felt. I mean, he didn't get off to a great start, but then he knew exactly where to position his car to prevent George Russell coming across. He left a bit less than a car's width on the right-hand side to prevent Lando Norris diving into the gap, so he kept the outside line, the grippier racing line, for himself, then braked later, then carried 30 kilometers per hour more into the braking zone, kept that momentum into the corner and got the move done. So yeah, excellent move. Of course, Piastri was too cautious. But to add a little bit to what JBL said, I I'm still a little bit cautious about Red Bull's progress, as was Max Verstappen after the race, because I know.
Yeah, but he always is, even when they're dominated by half a minute. Oh, I'm not sure the car's really that good. You can't believe what he says about that.
No. I know, but I mean, what Marco said, the upgrades finally lead to that the car is doing what Max wants the car to do, which is something I believe. But I do agree with Max that there's some kind of pattern that they are really good. If you look at the aero map, they are really good in the high-speed corners. They won in Suzuka. They should have won in Jeddah, I feel. Now they won in Imola. So, Monaco is probably going to be a bogey track for them. So that will not be representative. But then Barcelona is going to be an interesting one. Again, quite some high speed, but still huge tire deck usually. The clampdowns on flexi wings. So before any big conclusions on Red Bull progress, I would prefer to wait maybe 2 more weeks.
That seems fair enough. How very reasonable. Actually, I'm going to stay with you, Ronald. Just, as you mentioned Piastri there, do we think that McLaren maybe missed a trick towards the end of the race where Norris has got the fresher tyre, but he hasn't got track position on Piastri? Do we think? I know they're trying to play it even-handed, but that's not a problem that Red Bull have. Red Bull know very much who their guy is. Should McLaren have swapped them round quickly to give Norris more of a chance?
I mean, I'm not sure. If you talk about a race win, then yes, but you can't deny the bigger picture. And, both drivers are fighting for the championship. So if you're Oscar Piastri and you're here on the radio like, we have to swap positions, I'm not even sure he would have done it, and rightfully so. So, he's fighting for the championship as well. So I think in this stage of the season already to come up with team orders, it wouldn't be really fair towards Oscar. And I think Mark Webber would have 1 or 2 things to say about that as well. I think they played it fair. I'm more surprised in a way about the overall picture, especially compared to Friday. Friday they were a long way ahead in the long runs. Then on Sunday the race pace was just not quite there. Of course, a lot of speculation after the race. We just found out yesterday evening that the FIA issued 2 technical directives on Monday before Imola. One was on the materials around the skid blocks. The second one is about ways to keep the tires cool, a thing that we talked about a lot in the past couple of weeks. McLaren says it didn't affect us at all. Also, sources within the FIA, they feel it was just a clarification of the rules that were already there and not actual changes. But still, also that was the feeling on Sunday night for most Red Bull people. They said yes. Also, Pierre Wache admitted that yes, we've made a step, but just a small step. And they were more surprised by McLaren not being as dominant as they used to be. So that's also an interesting one to look out for going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned tyres and overheating. I know we have to keep coming back to it, but Jake, I would have said up until probably the last weekend that George Russell was the other person, along with Max Verstappen, maximising the car that they had at their disposal, keep the points going, and another great performance in qualifying at Imola. But then in the race, absolutely nowhere. They just seem to be frying their tyres, don't they? So are they still in that same sort of sensitive to temperature window that they seem to be in 2024, where some weekends they looked amazing and others just not at the races?
I think it is very dependent on track temperature, and the 2 races where Mercedes have struggled have been Jeddah and Imola, which I think have been generally the 2 consistently hottest races of the year with regards to track temperature. So it's a little bit of a strange one because Mercedes this year is a lot more stable. So one would assume that you've got a lot less rear end sliding, rear end downforce a little bit more stable. Therefore, the car shouldn't overheat its tyres as much. And there is that component to it, I think. But there's only so much you can do, and you start to reach a point of diminishing returns with that. And if Mercedes is a team that hasn't quite nailed how to keep the rear tyres into the window, how to kind of get its brake cooling and hub cooling kind of correct, then you are just going to keep hitting that problem until you start to look at the other details as well. So I wonder if they've maybe underinvested there a little bit. Again, we know that the W16 is a much better car. It just is a lot more stable, generally speaking. But yeah, it does seem that, to cut a long story short, that it has still got that struggle. But the funny thing was that Simone Aresta was asked this during the weekend, the deputy technical director, and he said, well, I don't think that this is something that's been cured from last season. I think they've made progress. That he thinks they made progress on it, but it's not gone, and it's not something that necessarily is going to just disappear over an off-season when the cars are relatively static with the rule set.
Now, Ronald, if Mercedes have produced a Saturday car, it would appear that Ferrari have produced a Sunday car, because both cars eliminated in Q2, but then come through to 4th and 6th in the race. Lewis Hamilton looked happier again, just 1.4 seconds off the podium. So why are they seeing the opposite to Mercedes, basically, struggling for one lap pace better in the races? Are we talking tyres again?
Yeah, I think so. I think they have some issues to switch the tires on over one lap. But I think Lewis Hamilton already hinted on this really early on in the season. He said we have one issue that prevents us from showing our potential, basically, with this year's car. Having said that, I feel that, race pace was better, but also with virtual safety car, things didn't go against Lewis this time. They did go against Charles, but not against Lewis. So, I'm not sure if the race pace is as good as Ferrari would like it to be, because let's be fair, they were still most of the race fighting with Williams. And yes, Mercedes was far back, but a fight with Williams is still not what Ferrari should aim for, of course. They were still behind Max, still behind the McLaren, so it's not a position they want to be in, and especially qualifying form has to improve dramatically. Charles Leclerc was really outspoken on Saturday, saying we are P nowhere. That was his quote. He said we are P nowhere, and it's difficult to accept this situation also in front of all the tifosi. So yeah, I mean, the end result was not too bad, and I'm happy for them. I'm happy for all the tifosi, but I think it doesn't mask all the structural bigger problems that are for sure still there. Also, going into Monaco, I mean, they are usually quite okay in terms of curb riding, so that should be better for them. But really telling was that one of the last questions Charles Leclerc got in, are you feeling more confident? It was a TV interview. Are you feeling more confident for Monaco? And he said no, and then just walked off. So I think it says a lot about feeling within the team, morale within the team. So even though the end result was not as disastrous as what could have been after Saturday, I still feel there's a lot, but definitely from the four top teams, probably most work to be done there.
Yeah, still lots to do. But I mean, you mentioned that they were fighting Williams. I mean, Jake, we should say that Williams have come forward, though. It's not that there was a midfield battle. Alex Albon said it felt strange to feel sad about finishing 5th. So that's surely a sign that Williams, this looks their most promising season for a long time, doesn't it?
Definitely. And the interesting thing about this as well is that they've built the FW27. FW47. We go back a little bit
video.
They built the FW47, and the plan has always been we build the car and then we focus on 26. So the performance still seems to be coming from that car, purely from tweaks with setup, understanding how the car operates at its best, and that sort of thing. It's not like it's a particularly flawed car, which I think helps. I think it helps that they've built something that's relatively handling-wise quite benign, decent top line speed, not quite as single trick merchant as some of its previous cars have been with regards to straight line speed. It's a strong car, and for them to be disappointed with P5, it did look for a very long time that Albon was within a shot of a podium. I think in that middle stint, his pace just paled with regard in comparison to Piastri's, which was a little bit of a shame, but it was kind of, you kind of saw it coming. Piastri's in a McLaren and Albon is not.
Just the fact you're making the comparison is good. Yeah,
exactly. And then the battle with the Ferraris, that was something we saw in Miami as well. The fact that they are there together, it's quite reassuring to see from their perspective. From Ferrari's perspective, not quite so much. It shows they've not really made much progress. It's just, I think operationally is the key issue with Williams. And Carlos Sainz seems to be bearing the brunt of that, in that he didn't get quite the strategy. Albon went long into the stint, and that gave him the advantage when the VSC came out. Sainz pitted early, had to deal with all the traffic and that sort of thing. Yeah, I don't think he's particularly happy with processes at the moment, but it's a learning process. This is kind of a year for the team to refine itself before it goes into 26 in a much better sort of state of mind.
Yeah, it's pretty encouraging, isn't it? So, one quick question: should Leclerc have been punished for his contretemps with Albon?
I think at the time I thought he probably should have been, but he gave the place back, so I think it's all fair there. Just thought it was really robust. I think I did have a very quick look at some of the GPS data. Leclerc did kind of bleed off of the brakes a little bit just to stay ahead, and it's all that sort of racing rules nonsense, isn't it?
What do you think, Ron? Do you think that was? Do you think he should have given the place back / got a penalty, or do you think that was fair game?
I think no. I think by giving it back it was fair. Otherwise, probably should have been a penalty. But I agree with JBL that it's getting more and more complicated, and I would say way too complicated with the racing rules. Especially if you change them like every single month, then drivers don't know what to do, and it becomes more studying the rule book instead of proper racing. I mean, we talked about Max Verstappen a lot in the past, that he knew he just had to be in front of the apex, so he could just get off the brakes, get in front of the apex, and then claim the corner. And that's the kind of racing you encourage. So I think we should go back to more. I know it's difficult because then you get a lot of discussion about stewards and no consistency, but I would definitely prefer to go back to some common sense and not make the rule book thicker and thicker every single year.
I would agree with that, and I'd also agree that I think that Leclerc was out of order, but I'd also say the reason we've got these rules is because Verstappen has keep testing the black and white in the rules and going, I can do this, and they've gone, oh no, we need to redo the rules. Where someone really just need to say, well, no, that's not racing, mate, have a penalty. So instead we've ended up with over-regulation, but that's probably an entirely different podcast and video and debate. So let's move on. So Aston Martin, who've had let's face it, a pretty disappointing season so far, but brought a new floor upgrade that seemed to work pretty well. Both drivers in Q3, but then failed to score points. So first of all, what have they done to improve the car, and what do you think led to their downfall in the race?
Well, it did lead to extra downforce as well, Kev, so you are right.
Freudian.
Exactly. So I've done sort of an analysis of the new bits over the weekend, so relatively au fait with everything. So as part of that was, as you say, the new floor. It was pretty heavy upgrades here because the car is missing downforce. The drivers have very little confidence in it, so they needed to strengthen the downforce that it produces and do so more consistently, which I think, the two golden rules of getting performance out of the floor. To manage that as well, new side pods, tightening up what we call the Coke bottle around the rear of the car. So that's just the body work around the kind of the engine, the gearbox, mitigating drag in this area, making sure that the kind of diffuser top surface is exposed so you can build your pressure differentials and that sort of thing, and just increase the suction coming under the floor, basically, therefore further improving the downforce. So it's kind of everything working together. This was something that Lance Stroll had on his car during practice. They moved Alonso onto the package for the rest of the weekend, I understand. And it actually looked really, really good in qualifying. And I think part of that was the drivers having a little bit more confidence over one lap. The second part of that was taking a little bit of a gamble with moving to the medium tyre, which is, it's still a soft tyre, it's still the C5, because the C6s looked like they weren't holding up quite, for some of the cars anyway, not really holding up over the lap. And if you're one of the teams where tyre deg is a little bit of a concern, then you do bolt on the C5s and benefit a little bit from the improved pace in the final sector, because it's all about what you lose. So even though the C6s could be quicker over a lap, do you lose a couple of tenths in that final sector that you could then get back with the C5s? That's kind of the trade-off here. The problem was they kind of took a little bit conservative with the strategy. It didn't split Stroll and Alonso and have one go long and one go short. Both of them pitted relatively short into the first stint. So that meant by the time they got to the VSC, they were just in the pack and nowhere. So that's part of it. There was also the point where in that middle stint as well, they just had really little pace on the harder tyre. Alonso was getting past left, right and centre. Did bounce back towards the end of the race actually, but it's just a bit disappointing really, because it looked good. It looked like they were in a much better place. And unfortunately, just circumstance and maybe strategy let it down.
Yeah, it's hard to feel they're not in a bit of a holding pattern for 2026, isn't it, that team, with Adrian Newey presumably already looking at the regs for next year. But another team that had a miserable weekend, or more miserable weekend really, was Haas. Esteban Ocon failing to finish, Ollie Behrman in 17th. 3 straight weekends without them scoring a point after actually quite a promising start to the season. So, Ronald, what's going on at Haas, do you think?
Well, above all, a lot of frustration after qualifying with Berben getting knocked out, and they feeling he finished the lap before the red flag came, which the FIA clarified afterwards. So I feel that was all okay. Was also a little bit surprised to see the statement on Sunday morning. But if we zoom out a little bit and look at the overall weekend, then I'm not surprised by them struggling in Imola. I'm more surprised if you look at Miami and tracks like that. And then we have to go back to what Ayo Komatsu told us when I went to his session in Miami as well, and he gave a lengthy explanation about the aero map, which is basically the opposite of McLaren. McLaren really good in the low speed corners, struggling at least compared to Red Bull a little bit more in the high speed. And Haas said, yeah, we are also struggling a little bit in high speed, and of course Imola offers a lot of that. So they already were braced for a difficult weekend around Imola. So I feel that Imola was not that much of a missed opportunity. I think Miami was more of a missed opportunity. And of course, all teams around them are making big steps. We saw Aston Martin basically introducing almost a new car, as JBL just explained. Sauber, we'll talk about in a bit. But I mean, also making some progress. And then it's a test for Haas, who have always struggled a bit more if you look at the in-season development. So I think that's part of the story. Also for them, it's even more complicated to, do that balancing act of putting resources on 25 and 26. So I think they just have to maximize some of the, odd chances that they get. And I think Miami could have been one of them. Imola, not so much, but maybe Monaco, which has a lot of low speed, so maybe they can bounce back there. Let's hope that for the team.
And Ronald, I'm going to stay with you for more of the midfield battle, because Isaac Hadjar in the points again for Racing Bulls. It's kind of a quite impressive rookie season, isn't it?
Yeah, and he doesn't need to do too well, because then he will end up in the second Red Bull seat, and nobody wants to take that seat.
I was going to say, would you rather be in a Racing Bull or a Red Bull at the moment, the second Red Bull? I mean, it might be an interesting question for Yuki Tsunoda, I suppose.
Yeah, so if I can give Isaac Hadjar some advice, it would be slow down a bit for Monaco and Barcelona, please. No, but I mean, jokes aside, he's been really, really impressive. And also, I mean, I talk to Helmut Marko quite often, and the thing that Marko is most impressed with, and I think it's the same with me, that he's straight up to speed immediately, no matter which track we go to. A lot of tracks he never raced before in F2, never raced before in the junior formulas. The same goes for Lawson, who, of course, maybe mentally it's probably more difficult than he will admit during the media sessions. But
because he's driven the second Red Bull already.
Yeah, exactly. So he knows what it's like. But I mean, with Isaac, I'm extremely impressed. I know they probably turn up the engine a bit more on Friday, but I'm usually impressed with what he's able to do on Friday, like first couple of laps out of the box, straight up to speed, and then combining that with actually keeping the tires alive, which of course, if you jump from F2 to F1, it's one of the biggest things you have to learn. So he's straight on it. Of course, we all know what happened in Australia, and Helmut Marko calling it a bit embarrassing. But now, when I talk to Helmut Marko and mention the name Isaac Hadjar, he's usually smiling. So I think that says a lot. So yeah, he's really, really impressive so far. But again, on a serious note, I would be really cautious to link him to the second Red Bull seat too quickly, because we all saw what happened with Liam Lawson. I still think it's been too harsh on Liam, even though I think Yuki Tsunoda would have been the best pick in the first place. But then, to drop him after 2 races was way too harsh. And now they just need to stay calm and give Isaac Hadjar all the time to do what he's doing now, and that's developing within the second team.
Yeah, that seems sensible. I think most people would agree with that. Well, let's look at another driver change that's happened mid-season. So Alpine, I think probably Jack Doohan going was not a big shock. He didn't really get a particularly long crack at it, did he? But Franco Colapinto came in and had a fairly big crash in qualifying, and then 16th in the race. So difficult being dropped in, obviously, mid-season. So what do you make of his first weekend, Jake?
It's difficult because he came in, let's say, very similar circumstances to how he entered Formula One last season with Williams. And I did a really long analysis of his maiden race in 2024 with Williams at Monza. And yeah, sure, he was a little bit wayward here and there, but I was generally quite impressed by that. And then he followed that up with a series of some really good races, scored points, and then sort of tailed off towards the end of the season as the Williams got a little bit more difficult to handle around some of the circuits that it traditionally struggled at. this season he comes into the season with a lot more expectation than last season. He came in with no expectation last season. He was kind of considered, you're replacing Sargent for this guy. Like he's got no experience, that kind of thing. This time he's coming in with a lot more hype on his shoulders. The fact that he's been the heir apparent for some time. It's his first weekend in that car, so I don't want to be too harsh, but I think he was a little too wayward this weekend. There was that crash in qualifying, sure, but practice, he just sort of looked all over the shop, just being in the way of people on their long runs, and I think he'd got in the way of about half the grid at one point.
That's not going to make him popular at Monaco, is it, if that happens again?
Oh, no. And then, the crash in qualifying, he did set a decent lap in qualifying that got him into Q2, but then ruined his chances of participating in Q2 with his own crash. Start to the race wasn't particularly strong either. Got overtaken, I think, twice by two cars. I think Hulkenberg overtook him. I think maybe Lawson as well. I can't remember who started ahead of whom. But it just seemed to be quite a low-key weekend. And I think it's a good starting point to just get acquainted with the car and learn all of the systems. It's basically a systems and checks and balances kind of weekend, isn't it? And then Monaco will be difficult, and then Barcelona, I guess, will be the sort of first proper weekend where we see him on a circuit that he should know very well from junior Formula and that kind of thing. But it's just, if this is the kind of bellwether of what his weekends are going to be like with Alpine, was it really worth doing for Colapinto? The jury is very much out at this point.
It's probably a bit harsh to try and come up with a conclusion, isn't it, after one race? So we'll see how that goes. Well, before we look at Monaco, Ronald, a valiant effort from Nico Hulkenberg for Sauber, getting into the points for a bit and then finishing 12th, which must be a bit frustrating. But then a strange strategy for Gabriel Bortoleto, who didn't really give him a chance to show any sort of form, did it? So it just didn't really come together for them in the end.
No, just one thing to add on Alpine. The funniest bit was Flavio Briatore about the 5 races, saying, I read it somewhere and turned out to be the official Alpine press release. I think that sums up the situation at Alpine perfectly nowadays. But going to Sauber, of course they were frustrated. They admitted a mistake with Bortoleto, with the team saying, we got him in like 2 laps too late. In the end, it even turned out to be a 3-stop strategy for Bortoleto, with the last one being a free stop, of course. But it was also a strange one in overall, because a lot of drivers complained about the medium tyre, which, as JBL pointed out, was in fact just the soft, like the C5. And then after 10, 15 laps, it felt terrible. But after that, as we saw with Max and Lando, it basically came back to them. So that turned out to be a tricky situation for a lot of teams. The same with Sauber. They say, Nico also complained, but then afterwards the tyres came back alive again. But in the end, with the safety car, they admitted, it's pretty tough to fight against the Red Bull, which turned out to be Yuki Tsunoda at the end for the final point. But I think in overall, they can be relatively optimistic, especially if you look where they were last year before Vegas, so before they brought that big final upgrade. They were literally nowhere, and that we're talking about them fighting with a Red Bull, of course, after the massive crash that Yuki had. But we're talking about them fighting a Red Bull for P10 already is quite telling in a way about the progress they've made so far, which is even more encouraging for next year. Because, when we talked about Sauber in the summer break last season, all of us thought, okay, this is going to be a huge headache for 26. The engine program is completely new, which of course still is a massive unknown. But then also in Hinwil, they had a lot to prove. They still have. There's absolutely no guarantee for 26. But I think the fact that they could catch up a little bit and at least be part of the midfield fight is quite encouraging of the steps that they've been able to take so far.
Yeah, that seems fair. Well, I think that's probably enough of a review of Imola. Let's have a quick look ahead to Monaco. I'm sorry, Jake, to hit you with another tyre question. But did the C6, which is having its first outing at Imola, does that give you any kind of hope for Monaco, or we've got this mandatory 2-stop race?
I think as a qualifying tyre, it should hold up a little bit better in Monaco, just because you have a lot less deg there, because speeds are a lot reduced, so you're not putting nearly as much load through it. But someone will have to remind me of the tyre rules. I don't think you have to use all 3 in the race. I could be wrong. If that is the case, and I don't expect we'll see the C6 in the Grand Prix itself. But I'm intrigued about how the mandatory two-stop will play out, because usually it's not. I don't think it's going to be the situation like last year where you have the red flag on after the first lap and then just stick some tyres on and just carry on for the rest of the race because I don't need to stop again. It's not going to be like that. It's going to ward that off. It should give you a little bit of variance, and it should give you an opportunity to, let's say, when you're looking at the kind of cut and thrust of the race and analysing the gaps between the cars and that kind of thing, at which point do you pick, okay, I've got enough free air so I can try and undercut the car in front, go and do some quick laps in the free air rather than being kept in a train, and see if you can come out ahead. So I think it should offer a little bit of variance here. I think it'd be quite interesting. It is, by definition, contrived, but I don't hate it. I don't hate it.
Well, I mean, I was looking into this the other day. I think the last time there was an overtake for the lead of the Monaco Grand Prix, if you exclude pit stops, mistakes, starts, was Michele Alboreto overtaking Alain Prost in 1985. So I think we're now 40 years since there's a genuine overtake for the lead at Monaco. So I think probably doing something with the strategy, which is probably going to have someone at the back half of the race is going to pit early and get an insane track position. Somehow they're going to have a train behind them in the middle part of the race. But Ronald, are you even taking that into account? Are you bracing yourself for the usual Monaco exciting qualifying, fantastic driving, close to the walls, and then a fairly dull Grand Prix?
Well, yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I'm massively looking forward to Monaco, but that's for personal reasons, because I always, as I said at the beginning, I love going trackside there. It's one of the best experience you get around an F1 track, so that's absolutely sensational. And then I think also watching qualifying, it's one of the few places where you really get the sense of speed, even though it's the most slow speed track of the whole calendar. But I think qualifying is always epic there. And I do agree with JBL. I don't think we will get a pass for the lead on track this year, but I do think it does spice things up a little bit with teams at the back, as you said, probably taking a gamble and doing 2 pit stops early on, and then gambling on safety cars and all kind of chaos and winning some track positions. But also, and I think that's the main element, you get, if the field is close, and it usually is in Monaco, it gives you at least 2 chances to try an undercut. And usually in Monaco, we are all waiting to the first and only series of pit stop. Who's going to go for an undercut, and then you get disappointed because nothing changed, and that's basically it. And you can get a coffee or a tea, and that's
very easy to lap chart, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But now at least we have 2 moments of potential excitement. So yeah, it's a bit artificial and fake in a way, but yeah, I do agree. We needed to change something, and it's difficult to change the layout. So then at least this is the least they can try, I feel.
Yeah, that seems fair enough. And Jake, are we expecting any Monaco-specific upgrades for the weekend? Anyone's going to rock up with something interesting?
I think we've had quite the big shipment in for Imola, and then everybody's attention is going to be on Barcelona, because obviously we've got the revised front wing flex tests in place for round 8. I don't know why they didn't do it for the start of the season, but that's the way they decided to do it. So a couple of teams have already brought new front wings. I think Alpine did and Mercedes did at Imola. And they said basically, I think Simona Resta again said something along the lines of, we'll see if it's legal when we get to Spain.
No, you won't. You'll know before then.
Oh, exactly. So we expect that this should affect everybody. Everyone will have to produce something that by definition flexes a lot less. I'm sure that everybody sees the kind of onboard camera of the front wing and it sort of backing off and then coming higher angle of attack into the corners. Should be less of that. And I think when it comes to Barcelona, the interesting part will be, how much does this affect everybody? Is this going to affect McLaren more than everybody else? Or is it going to affect Red Bull and they were just kind of, throwing accusations out? Will it affect Ferrari more? Will
Deflecting tactics?
Yeah, that sort of thing. That's going to be an interesting thing. But Monaco, it's always a really difficult place to bring upgrades, because if you've only got one and you put the car in the wall, then you don't have it for the rest of the weekend. And it's just such a specific track, isn't it? So it'll just be full wings and, barn door rear wings, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm going to finish with a couple of questions. I'm going to put you both on the spot. You first, Ronald. Is Monaco still important to F1, given that we've just said it's 40 years since the lead overtake? And if so, why?
I think yes. I mean, first of all, commercially, of course, you got all the races in the US, but if you talk about Europe, I think commercially it's still the biggest weekend of the calendar. And also historically, I mean, I'm against the trend of getting rid of tracks like Spa. I mean, Zandvoort took initiative themselves to avoid some financial risks. But I think it's really sad to see. And yes, Monaco is definitely not the most exciting one. But if I've got to choose between Monaco and maybe some tracks in the Middle East, I still prefer Monaco and all the excitement that it brings on Saturday. So I think both commercially, also historically and sporting, I think Monaco still has a place on the F1 calendar.
Yeah, there were. I think there were all sport journalists complaining about the size of Monaco for modern F1 cars in the second half of the 1970s. So it's not really a new problem, is it? We're not going to suddenly have a solution. But Jake, would you agree with that alternative view?
Yeah, I think so. No, I think I pretty much agree with everything Ronald said.
Oh, how boring!
I know. I'm sorry.
Come on.
Well, the thing is, I don't think you can. And as you've already alluded to, is that qualifying is always super exciting because this is putting these cars and these drivers into a really difficult situation with the walls and bumpy circuit and difficult corners, and it's a test. It's a proper test to get on pole position. And yeah, sure, the races can be dull, but when you get inclement weather or you get you or other circumstances, sometimes it can be interesting and exciting. And not every race has to be, a 10 out of 10 spectacle. Other races, it's nuance, isn't it? It's some races bring other things, and as Ronald already said, it's important commercially. It's a good place for sponsors to kind of meet each other and focus on the future and that kind of thing, and sign deals. I think it has its place, and that's the thing, isn't it?
All right, well, let's see if I can get you for different answers for the final question then. So who's going to win the Monaco Grand Prix this year?
Oscar Piastri, I would say.
Ronald, come on.
I think Max definitely needs rain on Saturday, so I'm going to go with a McLaren as well, but then I'm going to go with Lando. Let's finally hope that he puts a qualifying lap together, and then let it be Monaco, and then get the job done on Sunday.
I mean, that would actually be incredibly ironic for Norris, who struggled to not make
I know.
mistakes in qualifying. And then
Yeah.
the one where if you make a mistake, you win the ball, he actually nails it. That would be quite a good confidence boost. I think that'd be quite an interesting story in itself. Well, thanks very much, chaps. That was good. That'll just about do us for our Imola review and our Monaco preview. Be sure to keep up to date with all the in-depth analysis and reporting on Autosport.com. We'll be back next week with a review of the Monaco Grand Prix. We're looking ahead to another critical round on the calendar, the Spanish Grand Prix, with those new tests that we talked about, the controversial flexi wings. Until then, thanks very much for watching.